Welcome to In the Ven Zone with Christine McKay, where we get candid about what it takes to negotiate effectively. You'll learn from the challenges and successes of entrepreneurs, executives, and experts. We help you change the nature of your negotiations and get more from every deal you do.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of In the Ven Zone. You know me, I'm always so excited about my guests. And today is yet again, no exception to that rule. I am super excited to have Brandon Allen on with me today. And Brandon is a business coach du jour. He's just like a guru god. I don't know what to describe him as. He's amazing. He's done some amazing things that started out kind of not having such a great experience and defining that his own leadership skills were kind of not where he needed them to be successful. And he went on a 3-year journey to create some self-awareness and figure some things out. And guess what? He really did. And not only did he figure some things out, he learned a whole lot of things. And now he helps his clients do those very same things. And he actually described in his Media One sheet that he describes himself as funny, charming, interesting, and handsome, all of which claims are highly questionable other than the first being funny. So I have had a few comedians on this show, which I always enjoy. So I think we're going to have a really fun conversation. But what does this have to do with negotiation? Well, my experience has proven to me anyway, that really effective negotiators are really effective leaders of themselves and of others. And that's why Brandon's here, because we are going to have a conversation about that. Brandon, welcome. And thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your time with us.
Hey, thank you, Christine. I appreciate it. Thanks for the kind words and thanks for having me on.
Awesome. And by the way, guys, if you want to get the transcripts to this episode, just go to venn.zone and you can find them there. We have a little gift waiting for you too, if you want to check that out. So Brandon, tell us a little bit about you. Tell us how you ended up on this journey.
Yeah, boy, I'll tell you what, it starts from an early age. Growing up, I did not have a dad that was present. My mom was a drinker. And there were times growing up that I felt like I was all alone. I was the only person that was looking out for me. And I think subconsciously early on, and I noticed this in sports that I did and through college, that I really enjoyed helping people and being an advocate for someone else. And so I wasn't really present to that, or I didn't realize that's really what I wanted to do until I started working in the corporate world. I worked in finance. And so I remember working in finance, and about 2 months into my job in finance, I realized I hated finance, but I just went ahead and stayed 10 years just in case I was wrong. So I did it for a decade. And the thing that I remember walking away from that was I really enjoyed mentoring people. I really helped getting them to their next step in their own leadership journey. Now, the irony of that is the thing that held me back was also partly my strength. And so growing up, not counting on other people, I was very distrustful of other people. I loved helping others, but no one could help me. So that's where I struggled as a leader, is I wasn't vulnerable, I wasn't open. I was very much kind of hold people away from me. And that created a lot of disconnection with the people that I worked with. And so overcoming that really helped me to see all the dimensions that are important as a leader. And now I have 4 daughters and everything else. It's all of those things are important to leadership. And so I fashioned myself as almost a leadership advocate for people, just based on my experiences, from when I was younger to that's the thread that connects everything that I do.
That's awesome. I love that. One of the things that I like to talk about is the importance of self-awareness in negotiation. And, I was talking to a gentleman who is the head of Ernst & Young's strategic negotiation practice. And he was telling me that one of the things he likes about what I do is that I talk about the individual, yourself, you. and what that means. And so tell us a little bit more about what caused you to go on this journey. So how did you realize that you had some areas that were not what you wanted them to be, that were holding you back?
Yeah. For a long time, I was not present to that. And I'll tell you, the first time I realized that maybe I needed to do some self-assessment, it was in college. And I had a good friend of mine, her name was Katie. She said to me one time, she said, Brandon, you're one of my very best friends. I really enjoy you, but you're a really hard person to get to know. You're so aloof. And at the time, I didn't even know what aloof meant. I was just like, oh, okay. And then I went and looked it up later, and I was like, well, that's not very flattering. And I know she didn't mean it disrespectfully. I know she meant it. It came from a good place. And so it made me kind of think about that a little bit. That's the first time I started to think about, maybe there's some things about myself that I need to look at. And I always say it's hard to read the label when you're inside the bottle. And so there was some things that maybe I didn't see. And then I got into a work environment where I was very successful in sales. And so I got promoted, and I really wanted to be a good leader. I was really excited about it. But then when I got into a leadership situation, the things that made me good at sales and the things that made me really good at just getting things done were just pushing ahead and never giving up and working really hard. And my expectation was that everyone else would do the same things that I did. And so when people didn't do that, I got really frustrated with it. And I was very impatient. I was very demanding. And so here I am, I get promoted. I move to a town I've never lived in before. I get married, and my wife moves out to this place she's never lived before. And now I'm thinking I'm going to get fired because we suck. My office sucks. We're doing horrible. And I had a conversation with my boss about it, and he said, what do you think is going on? Now, I did the least leadership thing that I could do in that moment. I said, well, my team sucks. If I had better players, then we would do better. And I can't win with these people. And he said, well, Brandon, I know you like sports and you use a sports analogy. He said, what do they do in sports when the team struggles? And I was like, oh, I don't know that I like where this conversation is headed. I was like, well, they fire the coach. He's like, 100%. And so he said, now, what do you want to do about that? And I said, well, I clearly need some help. There's some things that I am not seeing that I don't know. And so there were a couple of things that I did. The first thing, as I asked my team for feedback, and I had a woman who had been with the company longer than I'd been alive. She said, do you really want to know? When I asked her what she thought about my leadership and everything else. And I immediately knew I had regretted asking her as soon as she said that. But what happened in that conversation was really powerful. And it started with, we don't like you. And then she unpacked that for me to let me know how I was showing up. And that was really hard to hear. I mean, I remember going home that day and I was just sick to my stomach. And then I reached out to my boss and I said, look, I need some help. What can we do? He sent me to a workshop that was actually here in Utah, which I had moved away from. And it was about coaching for success. And I remember the first day, when you go to a workshop like that, it's always about unpacking where you're at and assessing what you're doing, right? And so I must have checked probably 20 things that they said not to do that I was currently doing. And I was like, oh my gosh, I am doing such a horrible job at leading people. All these things I thought I knew, I don't know. So I take it back to my team and I humbled myself first and foremost. And I said, listen, I've listened to your feedback. I've heard I've listened to experts talk about the way to lead well. And I realized that there's some things that even though my intention is to lead well, I'm not leading you well. And so I resolved to work on three things. Connection was the first one. The second one was communication. And the last one was about consistency. And I realized those three things were missing for me as a leader: connection, communication, consistency. I was someone who I had these grand plans. I never followed through on them. I wasn't a good communicator. I wanted to be nice. I wanted people to like me, which is ironic because they hated me. The more I tried to get them to like me, the more they didn't like me. And my connection was off. And that was really the first thing that I really needed help with. And so that was the first time that I'd been in an environment where I'd really failed and done a poor job, and that my deficiencies really came out in a big way, where before I could always mask those deficiencies by performing as an individual really well. Well, now I'm in the context of a team. And that was the first time I really saw that I had some work to do in that particular area, and really set me on a course for my own self-awareness and personal development.
I love that. I love those three things: connection, communication, and consistency. So for those of you who, have seen my podcast cover art, you'll see my company logo, which is this 3-circle Venn diagram. And I don't know if you know Blair Dunkley, but Blair is he's one of my big mentors. And I talk about negotiation very much around kind of what you're about, what your counterpart is, and the situation that you're negotiating. But I love that you broke this into 3s because it fits very nicely into the Venn diagram. But right. I love that because in negotiation, right, I was talking to somebody who actually was part of the team that negotiated the Israeli-Palestinian peace treaty many years ago. And that was one of the things that he talked about was connection, that you have to make a connection. Because when you're leading somebody, when you're leading a group of people, you are constantly in negotiation. You are constantly in negotiation with them to inspire them, to motivate themselves, to take action and get things done in the way that you want to do that. What happened after that conversation? So what did you do with the team at that point?
Slowly, I started to change my behaviors. Old habits die hard. I would love to tell you that we did like a prayer circle and played the guitar and cried that very day. We didn't.
Kumbaya.
But over time, I took more time doing some things that for most, I shouldn't say for most, I'm a believer that there's 2 types of people at work. There's the get shit done, process-oriented people, and there's the connectors. There's the relationship-oriented people. So if my wife and I are hiking, my thought process is, how quickly do we get to the end? My wife's thought process is, did you see the flowers, the waterfall, all the amazing scenery on the way to the end? Mm-hmm. That's kind of the analogy that I use. And so for me, it didn't come naturally for me to small talk and ask people how their weekend was. That just wasn't something that I did. I came in, I did my work, and I went home. And so I learned, ask questions, get to know the people that work for me. And the funny thing about this is how it turned out. Because I started to show up differently and I became a stand for my greatness and for theirs, which meant that in the area of communication and consistency, I started to set more boundaries. I started to be more clear about what it was that I wanted. I started to enroll them in the opportunity that we had together to work and win. And because I brought them together and they trusted me, that was the first thing that needed to happen with connection, was to build that trust. They started to listen and to enroll themselves in the things that we were trying to do. And I took the same team that I swore to God I couldn't win with, and we became one of the top rated offices in my area. And then I got promoted. And then I promoted one of those supposed losers that I couldn't win with to replace me as a result of that. So a couple of years later, that's where we ended up. And one of the things that I did in this process that I think as a leader, you're not always told to do these things, but I told them, I'm giving you permission to hold me accountable to the things that I've just committed to. So when you see me not showing up this way, you have my permission to call me out. I know I'm your boss, but I am not above reproach. And so I'm giving you permission to call me out when you see something that I'm doing that is contrary to the leader I told you that I wanted to be. That created a really powerful context for them, because I think for a lot of people, when it comes to self-awareness, what we do is we act like no one knows that we have these issues. And so if you think about the concept of, there's a concept called Johari's window. And Johari's window is about 4 quadrants. There's things that are known to me and known to you. We know them together. There's things that I know that you don't, that I keep hidden. Those are things that I haven't told you about that you don't know. There's things that you know that I don't, and those can be blind spots in a relationship. And then there's areas where we both don't know something, and that's the way it is. Now, for leaders, we act like we don't have blind spots and that those things don't exist. And so we act like the things that are going wrong inside of us don't manifest themselves in the outside world. What a team wants to know from a leader is, does this person recognize his or her own shortcomings? Do they recognize them? And if they do, I can respect that, because I also am aware that I have my own shortcomings in that process. So I really took ownership of that. And I think they respected the fact that I was willing to do that, and then that I would let them hold me accountable to that, which I found very helpful, because as you know, when we try to change behaviors, old habits die hard. So I needed someone to hold the mirror up and let me look in the mirror to see if I liked what I saw. And sometimes I did, sometimes I didn't. And so that was really helpful for me in making that change.
Oh, I love that. And you know, the thing is that people think that when they're in a negotiation that they can't do that. And they think, oh my gosh, I mean, you commented on, used the word fear a couple times and some other things. And it's like, I talk a lot about how, and trust, right? So people are afraid to ask for what they want. A lot of times we're afraid, we tell ourselves, no, we can't do that. And then when the majority of people go into a negotiation not trusting that their counterpart has their interests at heart, right? Yeah. And so we go in, and so that creates really crappy negotiated relationships, because at the end of the day, the negotiation, and people who are regular listeners to the show know that my philosophy about negotiation is that it is a conversation about a relationship, and you can't win relationships. You can only find ways to create more value out of them and make them better. And so what I love about what you're talking about is essentially transparency. And people think that when they're at the negotiation table, they can't do any of this stuff. They can't call you out on behavior. They can't do that. That's why I said at ground terms, I have a call this afternoon with a gentleman, and he happens to be an attorney. We're negotiating a deal. He's not really, doesn't have much of a relationship with me. And he's like, I want to dive to the proposal. And I'm like, reeling him. I'm going to reel him back. I'm going to go, okay, we're a long way from having a conversation about a proposal. I like to just get to know who the heck you are. What motivates you? What gets you excited? What, you know, why do you want to have this conversation in the first place with us? Right. You know, what hopes do you have out of this relationship? And then, you know, and then I want to set some ground rules. I tell people, like, this is who I am at the negotiation table. Typically, if I exhibit this behavior, call me out on it. Make sure you say, hey, you just kind of got a little snippy there, or what, tell me, let me know. Because, you know, and then I'll let you know, I commit to you that if I get a little snippy, or I bite back, or I'm doing something that's inconsistent with what we've talked about, how we're going to behave at the negotiation table, then you get to call me on that. And I have to be transparent back to you to say, oh, well, I meant that, or no, oh crap, I didn't mean that, right? And it's like that doing that at the front end of every negotiation totally changes how the negotiation unfolds. Even if a deal doesn't happen, you walk away with a level of respect and trust in each other, and many times a friendship with somebody, even if the deal at the end of the day doesn't make sense, because you set that groundwork up front about who am I and who are you.
Absolutely. I love that. And so I think about confrontation at work as an opportunity for negotiation. Now, it isn't always that way, because sometimes we're giving one-way feedback that, you know, is just that needs to be one way. For instance, if someone is sexually harassing someone else at work, we're not having a negotiation about that. I want you to stop doing it, right? Like that's an example of that. But in a lot of cases, we're going to have a conversation about it. And so there's a framework that I think is useful to anyone who wants to negotiate better. It's in thinking about someone's brain and how they respond to certain stimulus. And so Dr. David Rock wrote a book called Your Brain at Work. And so he hooked people up to a functional MRI, and he studied their brains and the stimulus that they got from certain things that they did. And they noticed that there were 5 core things that we wanted to have present to keep people in a reward status and keep them out of fight or flight. And so when we're in fight or flight, obviously our prefrontal cortex shuts down. We lose the cognitive ability to really be rational and really to cognitively think. That's why we say so many stupid things and do stupid things when we're scared or we're angry. That's why we do those things. And so the framework goes like this. S, it's called SCARF. And so S is for status. We don't want to diminish someone's status when we're working with them. And I think it's really easy, like if you're a leader and you have a subordinate, to treat someone like an underling, like someone who's just a little minion that needs to do things. Well, when we diminish people's status, that puts them in a fear situation, because now they don't feel like a peer or an equal. They feel like an inferior that now needs to kind of worry about when's the other shoe going to drop. C is for certainty. And I work with a lot of entrepreneurial types who are very much interested in what's their next best idea. Now, the problem with that sometimes is we go 100 miles an hour in one direction one day, and then we decide the next day, because we want to and it's fun, we want to go 100 miles an hour in the other direction. Now, you're free to do what you want, but when you have a team, that creates a lack of certainty. People don't respect that kind of uncertainty, that kind of change of direction. And they want to know, what is the plan? Where are you going? What can we expect from one day to the next? And that's why, I've worked with people and I've had bosses like this. They're nice one day and they're insane the next. And you never know from one day to the next what you're going to get. And I would prefer that someone either just be happy all the time or be a psychopath all the time. I don't care which one you choose, because I know how you are. I know what's going to show up. But when you're uneven, that's really hard to do. So we want to create an air of certainty with people when we work with them. A is for autonomy. We want people to have choice. We want people to know, and this is why even in a confrontational situation as a leader, I tell people, how do you want to handle it? And I do that because I want to be a describer, not a prescriber. I'm not here to write you a prescription and fix you. I'm here to point something out and show you something. And then I'm going to allow you to decide how you want to respond to that. And now you're in the driver's seat. I want you to feel that way at all times. R is for relatedness. And this is really important because we were just talking about this. Are you a friend or a foe? And that's really important, because if I know you care, I will listen to your critique. I will listen to something that's difficult. But if I think you're my enemy, no, I'm not going to listen to you. In fact, you can go wherever I tell you to go, because I don't want to listen to it. So relatedness is really important. I struggled with this early on as a leader, and it hindered my progress. And then F is for fairness. Is what we're doing fair? And we don't mean fair that everything has to be the same all the time. It's not true. But it does mean that if we have a boundary and someone crosses it, we confront it. It does mean that if we make a request and someone agrees to that request and then they don't honor that request, that there are some ramifications to doing that. It does mean that we give people the same opportunities to do certain things, that, across the board, in a way that ensures that people feel like they have an opportunity to advance or do certain things. And so fairness is really important. And I've worked with a lot of cultures who are angry with their leadership team because they don't confront issues. They just let people get away with things. And so now we've said yes to the people who don't perform, while also simultaneously saying no to the people who do, because now it's like, what's my incentive to work in the construct of this agreement that we've had when you won't honor that agreement to begin with? And so I think even in a negotiation situation, you can take those 5 things and recognize how you can put that into that up front to ensure that that's the way that you're showing up for the person that you're negotiating with.
Yeah, I'd like to spend a little time on this because I like this as a framework. So, I mean, in a negotiation, one of the things that's really important. So we'll keep going with the example that
Yeah.
this guy that I'm meeting with, right? So he's an attorney's attorney kind of guy. So he's like a by the book, like he's a value taking guy. He's got something to prove kind of in his thing. And he
Absolutely.
thinks so relative to my client, he thinks he's superior to my client, right? So he has a very elevated view of his status and his style, whether it's intentional or conscious or subconscious, which I'll discover today, is to try to elevate himself and he does that by wielding power, he thinks he wields power, right? So my role, right, is to come in and acknowledge where he actually does have status. He is an attorney.
Mhm.
I am not an attorney. I respect the fact that he went to school, he got past the bar exam, that he's a practicing lawyer, he has that status. My status is I have a Harvard MBA, right? In order for the relationship to work, we have to acknowledge that each of us have status in different ways. I know more about business and business strategy and financial statements and a whole bunch of other things than he likely does across a wide range of industries, right? So we have different things that we have status for. So when you're negotiating with somebody and you feel that they're trying to exercise power over you, one way for you to deal with that is to actually acknowledge where they do have status.
Mhm.
And where you don't, and that you do not have that same status, right? It plays to kind of how they see themselves, but then you want to bring them over so that they start to see where you have status and you start to create more of a level. That's one of the ways to level the playing field. In terms of the certainty aspect, I'd actually, from a negotiation perspective, I'd actually move that to clarity versus certainty.
Sure.
Because in negotiation, right? Matter of fact, I was on a webinar with the CEO of BioNTech, and he was talking about the Pfizer BioNTech joint venture. And there's a third company in there, and I can never remember the name of it. They worked without financial terms and conditions. They have no idea how they were going to split up the money or how they were going to do anything except work together. They worked under an LOI for 9 months on the coronavirus vaccine before they had commercial terms and conditions in place. 9 months. We're talking about 3 large companies, shareholders, people. I mean, lawyers were freaking out about not having a deal, and management just was like, no. So they were clear on what they were doing. They were clear on what their mission was. They were clear on what their roles and responsibilities were. But what I loved about what the CEO of BioNTech said, he's like, we had no certainty on anything. There was no certainty whatsoever. And so we believed that as long as we had clarity and we could clearly communicate to all of our staff and everyone working on this, what our objectives were across all 3 companies, that we would get there. And he actually said that it's changing how they are negotiating going forward, especially in partnership relationships and some of their larger deals. I love the autonomy, because autonomy and negotiation is absolutely critical. Each party has to feel that they have a choice to make, not a decision, but that they have choices that they can exercise. And that autonomy is critical. So if you try to take, and I have been in negotiations where somebody has tried to take away my autonomy or others at the table, and it creates so much resentment that even in those situations where a deal gets signed, the fact that somebody took another's autonomy away means that they will never trust you again. And that the next time that they have the opportunity to replace you as a customer, as a supplier, as an investor, they will take it. So you have a deal for the short term, but you will not have a relationship for the long term. So autonomy in negotiation is absolutely critical, and acknowledging that you are granting that person, you can make whatever choice you need to make. And I'm fine with whatever choice you need to make for you, right? Because it's really an important component. I love the relatedness aspect. That's absolutely, I loved that one too. I don't actually have much to add on that. And fairness, I mean, the fairness component, right? So many times we get into negotiation, and I hate the term win-win. I absolutely despise it. And I hate this never split the difference garbage that's out there right now too. It's like, no, it's about fairness. Effective negotiations is about what's fair in our relationship. If negotiation is about a relationship and you're trying to create a relationship, you have to be fair in that relationship. Otherwise, resentment starts to build up. And the same thing that I just described, I'm going to replace you as a customer, supplier, and investor as soon as I can, if I feel that we do not have fairness in our relationship. And I always love to ask, does this feel fair to you? Because fairness is a feeling. It's an emotion. And so often we think that emotions in negotiation are bad. Well, you want to control them, but there's certain things that you want to check the temperature of your counterpart. And fairness is one of them. Does this feel fair to you?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, all those things are so true in negotiation. I mean, I think about the example you give about just not having autonomy. And I've had negotiations where someone's pinned me into a corner, they have me, and I succumb to their will because I feel like I have no choice. And you're absolutely right. That is a relationship that is doomed to fail. It's like, hey, you continually negotiate with me in what I feel like is bad faith from the very beginning, because you already have, a preconceived agenda that I may have to agree to. Then as soon as I can, I am ending that relationship, like the minute I can do it. And I never forget it. Never, ever.
No, those people, I mean, I know exactly who they are. I remember what they look like. I may not have seen them for 20 years, and I still remember their names, what they look like. I'd know who they were if I ran into them on the street, because it's such a horrible feeling to lose your autonomy. It's so horrible. It's a very feeling powerless is what it comes down to. And it's just not, and in a work setting, just not a good situation at all. Yet we see it all the time. And, there's a lot of conversation about, kind of unconscious bias, and how, unconscious bias leads to a loss of autonomy for people. And so I'm very encouraged that there's a dialogue that's happening about how do we manage that. In fact, Mike Domish was on the show. He almost got hit by a falling light bulb in his house while he was
I saw that. I watched that episode, and yeah, I saw that.
Yeah. It is like, what? I'm glad they didn't take it. They didn't edit it out, because I felt that it would happen at a poignant time. But yeah, I mean, I loved my conversation with him because we talked about respect. And, so often people feel disrespected at the negotiation table. And again, to what we were talking about earlier, really effective leaders, they don't do that. They give autonomy to their team. They give autonomy at the negotiation table to counterparts. There's research that suggests that CEOs are, and the more senior somebody is, the worse of a negotiator they are. Because, and one of the reasons in my experience is because they mess this autonomy component up. They mess this autonomy. The more senior the person is at the negotiation table, or if it's a founder, it's like, this is mine. They get more possessive about it, and that autonomy component is what really, really hangs them up. I want to just point out to everyone who's listening, we're going to have the show notes on ven.zone. You can go there. Brandon's named some great books. We're going to put the links to those in the notes, so go check that out. So tell me, I'm loving this conversation. So tell me, how is some of the things that you've seen with some of your clients, kind of how does that affect, or how has that influence kind of how you've transitioned your own thinking about leadership?
Oh yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I put so much stock, even early on in my career, even when we were successful, in what I was doing. And so I'll give you an example of kind of how this all came about. when we first started consulting, so I started consulting and coaching in 2008. So, because I just thought that was a really good year to start a business. I mean, we were so financially prosperous and everything was growing so great. I thought 2008, let's do that, man. The economy's falling apart. Honey, I'm going to start a business. And so we start out and we do strategic planning. That's what we're doing. And we're giving people plans and we're handing them to them and then watching as client after client struggles to execute. And I'm dumbfounded because I'm thinking that, well, this person just needs to know what to do. And if they know what to do, then they'll do it. And I started to realize that we all know things and we all have information and we're knowers, but there's something that keeps us from doing, and it's who we're being. And so I shifted my focus in coaching after the first couple of years to really dive into the being of a leader. And that's something that I didn't spend a lot of time thinking about early on in my career. I wasn't really conscious of, and starting to define who I am as a leader, what makes me a leader, and how do I own that every single day so that that's what shows up in the world that I work. And so part of that is I want to be a leader of connection. And I don't say I want to be, I say I am a leader of connection. Even before I was a leader of connection, I owned that space because that's where I was going. That's where I wanted to be. And so what I've seen is we help leaders understand who they're being in the doing that happens every single day so that they can really figure out what there is to see and know about the results that they get, good and bad, so that they really understand where those things come from and they can make change that isn't surface level, but that really gets to the root cause of what is getting in their way to getting to the next level that they're trying to get to.
Gosh, that's amazing. What's interesting to me about that, and I cannot remember her name and I have to go find it because I keep talking about this comment she made. So one of the things that's interesting to me about is this woman, she works primarily with women, and she made a statement that, when boys are little, they're rewarded for doing things, and girls are rewarded for being. So boys are rewarded for winning a race, playing a game, fixing something, and girls are rewarded for being pretty, being nice, being generous, all those kind of things. What's interesting to me about what you just said is that as a leader, right, you transitioned. It was all about the doing. It was the doing, and now it's about the being. Do you see anything when you think about like her comment about how that impacts men and women differently or the same, or it doesn't matter?
Well, I think that as a general principle, everything that we do starts from who we are. It starts there, regardless of who you are. Your being is what influences the doing. So what happens is we judge it when we don't understand it. And so if I don't do something this week, let's say you have a to-do list that has 5 items on it and you only do 2. Now, possibly, I don't know how you would relate to that, but what's common is people will look at that and say, I need to get my crap together. Why am I so lazy? I need to be more focused and I need to work harder tomorrow. And so that's what they do. But they don't investigate the 3 things on my list. Why didn't I do them? In fact, what is my relationship to that thing? So I do agree that as a young man, I don't remember being taught to be relational. I don't remember someone saying, like, how do you relate to this person, or how do you do that? Now, in some ways, I was told to share and those kinds of things. So that was true, but I don't know that I was really encouraged to be relational. And that just seems to come more naturally to women, that they are more naturally relational. Now that may or may not be true. I don't know. I haven't researched it. I'm saying that because that's how it feels, but that may not be true. So that, so I think about that. And so, we get so, and then when we're not this thing, being relational, let's say, because we don't do it, then we just say, well, I'm just not wired that way. That's not who I am. And it stops there. It just ends. There's nowhere to go with that. You're right. And so there's nothing else to do. And so I always look at be, do, have. we're the being of a leader, then we do the things that leaders do, then we have the things that leaders have. But most people get it the other way around. They say, well, if I have these things, if it's like the person at work, and I'll give you an example of a dental practice where I helped a younger dentist buy out an older dentist. And the younger dentist, I asked him, I said, hey, how are you showing up for people as a leader and building the framework of leadership to make this transition smoothly? And he said, well, I'm not doing any of that. And I said, well, why not? And he said, well, I'm not the owner, so I'm not doing that. And I said, okay, let's stop right there. I said, do you think that people are going to respect you differently because you signed your name to a piece of paper? No, they won't even care about that. It doesn't matter. Your time to build influence is now. But he's thinking that if I have a leadership position, then I'll do the leadership things and I'll be a leader. Doesn't work that way. And you can look at that with money, relationships, all those things. The being has to start first. And so that's the thing that I've really seen for everyone, that when we understand who we are being and how we're showing up and how we relate to certain things, then we can really get to the bottom of that. So for instance, if I find that putting things on my calendar is difficult, so if I've had a goal that's recurring of, I just need to schedule my time better. And so people will get on the phone with me and they'll say, Brandon, what I want to do is come up with a time management system. And I said, awesome. I said, call Franklin Covey, call David Allen, call any of those people that do time management trainings. And what you'll learn is the things that you already know. And I would love to tell you that the reason that you don't manage your time differently is because you don't have the right system. It's not true. Now, let's take a step back if you want to and do the hard work of time management by asking yourself, how do you relate to time? Well, I'm always busy. I never have enough. I said, okay, cool. And does that show up for you? It absolutely does. How do you want to be a being of time? How do you want to use your time effectively? And one of my favorite quotes is by a gentleman by the name of Bill Hybels. I hesitate to bring that name up because he used to be the pastor of Willow Creek Church. And then it turns out that he did some not so great things, but I still like the quote, right? So Bill Hybels said, I don't put things on my schedule for what I want to get done. I put things on my schedule for who I want to become. And so I asked him, I said, listen, does your schedule reflect you being a good spouse? Does your schedule reflect you being a good father? Does your schedule reflect being a good leader, a good marketer, a good salesperson? Whatever it is that you care about, does your calendar reflect that you have given that the space that thing needs for you to make that great? And if you haven't, what's the issue? And so when we get into time management, some of the common things that come up is, well, I don't like to be put in a box. Brandon, I'm a bird. I like to fly. I can't be constrained by a meeting time that starts at 10 and ends at 10:45. This seems oppressive. I can't do it. It's unreasonable. And so they don't. Now it's about changing our relationship to time. What does time allow me to do? And how do I want to relate to time differently? And so one of the concepts that I talk to people about is jazz music. So I was a jazz musician for about 12 years. I played the saxophone, and jazz is considered to be an improvisational art. It's considered to be something that you can play within the context of the music around you. And so even in jazz, though, I have a chord structure that I play. I have people who are playing around me that I'm going to play within that structure. And so I say, look, what you do is art, just do the art in a way that's going to honor that art by giving it the space and time that it deserves to do it well. And think about the things that you want. Think about how time will serve that. And instead of time being your enemy that you never have any of and that you're always stressed out about, how can time be your asset? And the only person who can change that is going to be you. There's not going to be a leprechaun that shows up on a unicorn that comes to your door and says, here's a box. Open it up. Oh my God, it's time. You're welcome. There's 8 hours of unfiltered time. You can use it however you want. And I will be back in 3 months with another box of time. That's not going to happen. So we have to make that conscious decision to do that. And that's kind of the distinction that I make between being versus doing. We get so caught up in the system that we forget how we relate to the system really matters. And that's the number one thing of anything as a leader that I've learned is to check with myself to see how I'm relating to the thing that's not working the way I want it to.
Well, you've given me some things to think about for sure. And it's interesting because when I'm talking about, when I do speaking on negotiation, one of the questions I often ask is who loves negotiation and who hates negotiation? But the way that you just described that, I love it because negotiation can be a triggering word for some people. And so it kind of institutes this fight or flight kind of thing. And, but it is about what's that relationship? Or what's your relationship to negotiation? And really the question from a negotiation perspective, it's what's your relationship to having relationships, right? Because if your relationship to having relationships is good, then your relationship to negotiation should be just fine, right? It should be good too, right? And so I love that. I love that because that I like the use of the time component. I've always, as a negotiator, I've always let time be kind of a tool that I either speed it up or slow it down, and I use it as a part of a negotiation strategy, which actually doesn't show up well. I don't translate to that well into my own business, where time then becomes, I often say time can be fungible from a negotiation perspective, depending on what I'm trying to do, which also means that time is fungible in my business, which is not always a good thing. So you've just given me different language to apply to that part. But from a negotiation part, I would love to for everyone tuned in, think about that in your relationship to negotiation. And, when you you're going to have a negotiation, if you're somebody who's like, oh, I'm going in to win, right? Okay, well, let's take a step back and go, okay, is that the relationship that I want to have with that relationship? Is that winning that relationship going to be effective? Or if you're somebody who's like, I'll get you the heck out of here, I don't want to deal with any of this negotiation stuff. Is it negotiation or what's your relationship to it, and why? How does that feel, and what's driving that? I think that's really good. I like that thinking. Thank you for that.
Well, I'll give you a negotiation kind of process for myself, right? I'll just break myself down. I always think about it as, is this spy versus spy, or is this two people who are trying to build a relationship? So if you remember Spy versus Spy, Mad Comics, I'm dating myself now as I'm saying this, but very irreverent. And I remember the Spy versus Spy comic strips. It was all about someone getting over on the other person. And how do we do that? And it was constantly one guy, one guy that was black, one guy that was white, right? They were dressed in black and white. I don't know. They probably didn't have any certain specific race. That came out weird. So, one was dressed in white, one was dressed in black, and they were trying to get over on each other every single comic strip. And that's what they did. And that's how I think a lot of times leaders go into negotiation, is we're trying to get over on someone else. And I know for me personally, the thing that held me back in being a good negotiator was the desire to be a winner. And the problem with being a winner for me is that was where my identity was tied to. I always had to win. I'm the kid that if I didn't win the board game, I probably flipped it over in the middle of the living room and walked away pissed. Whatever it was, like that was how I related to the world. And I related to relationships that way as well, that I've got to win this relationship. And for me, I can be very persuasive. I can be very dominant, and I can come in and just suck the air out of the entire room and take it for myself and just, oh, you want to breathe? Okay, well, ask nicely and I'll let you, right? Like I can do that. But I realized it didn't serve me because, like we talked about earlier, I won the battle, but I lost the war. Most of the time I had people who didn't want to work with me again or negotiate with me because of my insistence on winning. And unfortunately, that affected my marriage. That affected my relationship with my kids at times. And I really had to get clear on what is the purpose of this conversation. And I had someone tell me once, there's no empathy in being right. And so as someone who wanted to be right and wanted to be a winner, I realized there's no empathy in that. I'm not finding out, what does this person want? What do they need? What's their vision? Where are they going? How does this situation impact them for the future? And how do I set this person up for success? And if we can't come to a resolution that way, it's okay to just say, I don't think this is going to work. And I don't have to feel like a failure in that situation, because I'm not only being a stand for my own greatness, I'm also looking out for the greatness of someone else as well. And that was really tough for me. That was a lesson that took a long time for me to learn, because I tied my identity up in winning everything I did.
That's we have at event negotiation, we have a quiz that we have on our website, and we break down, and some people will say there are 5 negotiation styles. They include avoiding as a style. And I'm like, if you're avoiding in negotiation, you're not actually negotiating, you're having no conversation. So therefore, to me, it's not a style. But one of the styles that we label is a champion. And a champion is a champion for him or herself. They see the negotiation as a battle. They go into it fully armed, fully armored, and they are all about just annihilating their opponent and just getting the best of them and winning at all costs. And I met a gentleman a while ago who's in his 70s, and he took this quiz, and he called me, and he's like, I'm a champion. And he's like, my wife hates me because of it. And I'm scared that she hates me so much for it, that I'm scared that if I don't find a way to change it, that she's going to leave me. Because he would embarrass her in restaurants. Like if he was, if he had a reservation and they were 5 minutes late getting the table, he was the guy at the count, up at the hostess stand, laying into them about why isn't their table ready after, it's 5 minutes late, right? It's supposed to be right then. And just, and he's the guy who goes in and, tells the pizza place owner, I want a 25% discount and I don't give a damn about you. Right. And so that style, and I was at my very first interview on the show was with a gentleman named Edon Speiser. And Edon is just an amazing guy. And he owns over 100 franchises, and the franchise company is called 911 Restoration. They do carpet cleaning for fire damage and water damage and all that kind of stuff. And he's like, we were talking about how he selects franchisees. And the subject, this style came up, right? And he's like, if that style starts to come up, I walk out the door. He's like, that person will never know that it was their style that caused me to walk away from them. But he said, this is what I see when I see that style. I see an increased number of customer service issues. I see an increased turnover rate of staff. I see an unwillingness to learn and participate across the broader franchise. I see a lot of cost and a lot of headache, and it's just not worth it. And, so many people think that style is like, that's what negotiation is. Thank you, Hollywood, where I live, right? Hollywood, elevates that style, but it is so ineffective. And what you just described, it just shows that ineffectiveness, and, and what you've done to move beyond that and to change that is awesome. So congratulations to you and I'm really, it's always cool when we have, somebody who comes into our life and really tells us what we need to hear. And when we're in that place where we actually can hear it. Right. And so to that woman who showed you, and really, it sounds like she really was a pivotal person that caused you to go onto this different path. And, and you're helping so many different people now with all these things, these amazing lessons that you've learned. And I'm really honored that you have spent time with us to share it and have this conversation with me. How can people find you, Brandon?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of different ways. If you go to newworkrevolution.com, you can check us out there. That's just our general site. You can see what we're up to. We have a tool that we use that really assesses, am I creating growth and freedom, and what is the low-hanging fruit in my personal situation, in business, and in life? It's called the Profit Potential Index. If you go to myprofitpotential.com, you can take that free assessment there and check that out. And then I also have a podcast. So if you check out the Growth and Freedom podcast on Apple, you can check that out as well. And you may hear someone on an upcoming episode.
I am so excited about it. Thank you for that, Brendan. Oh gosh, this has been an amazing episode full of just lots of information, lots of tidbits and things that I think that all of us can walk away from. I learned a lot in this episode, which means that it will forever be one of my favorite episodes. And I forgot to mention, everybody, by the time this episode airs, my first book will be out. It gets published coming up soon. I'm so excited. On the 22nd of August, it'll be released. Why not ask a conversation about getting more? And oh man, there's just all sorts of stuff in it. It's amazing. I'm just so excited about it. It's been a labor of love. And when you pick it up, you'll be able to get a whole lot of tidbits and information and tools that you'll be able to apply to your negotiations. So check that out. You can check it out on our website at vennegotiation.com. And again, if you want to check out the show notes and you want to get links to all the books and everything and to Brandon's assessment, that will all be in the show notes at venn.zone. So thank you everyone for tuning in with us today. Again, I always am thankful that you've spent your time with us. And until next time, remember, negotiation is just a conversation about a relationship, and you cannot win a relationship, but you can get more value out of it. Happy negotiation, everyone. Thank you, and we'll see you next time, and cheers.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of In the Venn Zone with Christine McKay. We invite you to visit our website at www.venn.zone to access the show notes and other helpful resources. Empower the negotiator in you and successfully level the playing field. Join us again next time here on In the Venn Zone.